The breaking point, the summit of Arrogance Station Meridian, hung in the darkness between star systems like a jewel of metal and light. The massive structure served as neutral ground for the Galactic Trade Council, where hundreds of alien species gathered to negotiate commerce agreements and settle disputes. The station's grand hall could hold 10,000 beings, and today it was filled to capacity. Representatives from across known space had come to witness what many considered an amusing spectacle. The human petition for fair trade status. Captain Elena Vasquez stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by aliens who towered over her. At 42 years old, she had spent half her life navigating the complex politics of galactic commerce. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she wore Earth's diplomatic uniform, a simple navy suit that looked plain compared to the elaborate garments worn by other species. Above her, in tiered seating that rose toward the domed ceiling, alien delegates watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to open contempt. The Zathrian representatives occupied the highest tier, a position they had held for 3 centuries. The Zathrians were tall beings with crystalline skin that reflected light in prismatic patterns. They controlled 60% of galactic trade routes and had built their empire on the backs of species they considered inferior. Their leader, Trade Prince Vexner, leaned forward in his seat, his faceted eyes glittering with amusement. Elena had prepared her presentation carefully. She displayed holographic charts showing Earth's production capabilities, trade volumes, and economic growth over the past 30 years since humanity had joined the galactic community. The numbers were impressive by any objective measure. Human manufacturing had adapted quickly to alien technologies, and Earth's merchant fleet now operated in over 200 star systems. But when she finished her presentation, the chamber filled with sounds that approximated laughter in dozens of alien languages. Trade Prince Vexner stood, his crystalline form catching the light and casting rainbow shadows across the chamber. His voice resonated through the hall with natural amplification that made translation devices unnecessary. "The human believes she has presented a case for fair trade status," Vexner said, his tone dripping with condescension. "How charming. How utterly naive." He gestured toward Elena with one of his 4 arms. "Your species has been space-capable for barely a century. You use chemical propulsion supplemented with purchased drive systems. You inhabit 14 worlds, most of them barely terraformed. And yet you come before this council demanding to be treated as equals?" Elena kept her expression neutral, though her hands clenched briefly at her sides. "Earth has met every requirement outlined in the Galactic Trade Charter. We have established stable colonies, maintained peaceful relations with our neighbors, and contributed positively to galactic commerce. By law, we qualify for fair trade status." "By law?" Vexner repeated mockingly. "Tell me, Captain Vasquez, do you know why the Zathrian Consortium has dominated galactic trade for 300 years? He did not wait for her to answer. "Because we understand that law is merely the beginning of negotiation. Power determines reality, not words written by idealistic diplomats." The Zathrian prince activated his own holographic display. It showed a detailed breakdown of Earth's military capabilities, economic vulnerabilities, and political divisions. The information was accurate, which meant the Zathrians had spent considerable resources gathering intelligence on humanity. Elena felt a cold weight settle in her stomach as she realized this presentation had been carefully planned. "Humans possess 12 defensive platforms around their home world," Vexner continued. "You operate 47 military vessels, most of them converted civilian craft with basic weapon systems. Your colonies are lightly defended, relying on purchased security systems from more advanced species. You have no allies with significant military power. You are, in essence, completely vulnerable." The chamber had grown silent. Other species watched with interest, waiting to see where this was leading. Elena noticed that some of the smaller delegations looked uncomfortable, perhaps remembering when they had been in similar positions. But none of them spoke up. Vexner's next hologram showed a document written in multiple languages. The Zathrian Consortium proposes a new category of trade status: developmental partnership. Under this arrangement, Earth would receive preferential access to certain trade routes in exchange for modest fees. These fees would be calculated as a percentage of gross colonial production, with rates determined by the consortium based on market conditions. Elena studied the document, her years of experience in trade negotiation allowing her to quickly parse the deliberately complex language. What Vexner was describing was not a partnership. It was exploitation, dressed in diplomatic terminology. The modest fees would give the Zathrians control over Earth's economic growth, with rates that could be adjusted at will to prevent humans from ever achieving true independence. "This is nothing more than a protection racket," Elena said quietly. "You are demanding tribute in exchange for allowing us to trade in routes that, by galactic law, are supposed to be open to all species." "We prefer to call it the primitive species tax," Vexner replied, with what passed for a smile among his kind. "Consider it an investment in your species' education. Perhaps in another century or two, when you have learned how galactic commerce truly functions, we can revisit your status." Several alien species made sounds of approval. The Dravix delegation, insectoid beings who had been under Zathrian economic control for generations, clicked their mandibles in what Elena recognized as forced agreement. The massive Krolan representatives shifted in their seats but said nothing, their warrior culture making them uncomfortable with economic coercion but unwilling to challenge Zathrian dominance. Elena looked up at Trade Prince Vexner, keeping her voice level and professional. "Earth respectfully declines this proposal. We will continue to operate under standard galactic trade regulations and pursue fair trade status through proper channels." The chamber erupted in surprised chatter. Apparently, most species had expected humanity to accept the humiliating terms. Vexner's crystalline features darkened, light refracting through his form in angry patterns. "You decline?" His voice carried a note of genuine surprise. "Captain Vasquez, I do not think you understand the situation. The Zathrian Consortium controls the majority of trade routes in this sector. If Earth refuses our generous offer, you may find that galactic commerce becomes very difficult for your species. Shipping accidents, pirate raids, bureaucratic delays at trade stations. These things happen to species who fail to cooperate with established powers. Asterisk, are you threatening Earth?" Elena asked, her voice still calm, but with an edge of steel beneath it. "I am explaining reality," Vexner replied. "The galaxy operates on certain principles. The strong prosper, the weak serve, and the foolish suffer. Choose which category humanity will occupy." The incident 3 days after the summit, the human colony of Aurora Prime received an unexpected visit. The colony orbited a yellow star in the Epsilon sector, home to 8,000 humans who had spent 15 years building a new world. They grew food, manufactured goods, and raised families. Aurora Prime was not wealthy or strategic, just a peaceful settlement of people trying to build something better. Governor Michael Torres was reviewing agricultural reports when his communication officer burst into his office. "Sir, we have 12 Zathrian enforcement vessels entering orbit. They are not responding to hails." Torres felt his blood run cold. Zathrian enforcement ships were notorious throughout the galaxy. They operated under the pretense of maintaining order, but were really tools of intimidation and control. "Activate our defense grid and send a message to Earth immediately. Tell them we need help." Asterisk, but before the message could be transmitted, the Zathrian ships began jamming all long-range communications. Aurora Prime was isolated, cut off from the rest of human space. Torres watched helplessly as 6 of the alien vessels, moved into attack positions around the colony's orbital facilities. A transmission came through on local frequencies. The face that appeared on the screen belonged to a Zathrian enforcement commander, his crystalline features sharp and angular. Human colony Aurora Prime, you are in violation of Zathrian trade regulations. Your merchant vessels have been operating in protected zones without proper authorization. All colonial assets are hereby seized pending investigation. This is insane, Torres responded. We have documentation for every trade route we use. Earth has legal access to these territories under galactic law. Galactic law is subject to interpretation, the Zathrian commander replied. The Zathrian Consortium maintains special administrative rights in this sector. Your presence here constitutes trespassing and economic theft. Prepare for boarding operations. What happened next would be debated in galactic courts for years, though the basic facts were never disputed. Zathrian boarding parties forced their way onto the civilian transport vessel Morning Star, which had been carrying colonists and supplies between Aurora Prime and a nearby mining outpost. When the human crew attempted to comply with boarding procedures, the Zathrian soldiers claimed they encountered resistance. The Morning Star's reactor was deliberately destabilized. The ship exploded in a brilliant flash that lit up Aurora Prime's night sky. 234 humans died in that explosion. Among them were 73 children, including a school group that had been taking an educational tour of colonial operations. The youngest victim was 4 years old. Governor Torres watched the explosion from the colony's command center. He tried to contact the Zathrian commander, tried to surrender, tried to do anything to prevent further violence. But the enforcement ships had already begun targeting the colony's defensive satellites. Within 3 hours, Aurora Prime was completely defenseless. The Zathrian commander broadcast a final message to the colony. This incident will be recorded as a tragic accident caused by improper reactor maintenance on a primitive human vessel. The Zathrian Consortium expresses regret for the loss of life and reminds all species that proper adherence to safety regulations is essential. Aurora Prime will be allowed to continue operations under Zathrian supervision. A permanent enforcement presence will be established to ensure future compliance. Earth received word of the massacre 18 hours later. The response from the human government was immediate and absolute, complete silence. No official statements were released. No protests were filed with the Galactic Council. Earth's diplomatic missions across the galaxy stopped, answering questions about Aurora Prime, the few human. Military vessels in space returned to defensive positions around the whole world and went dark. The galaxy interpreted this silence as fear. The Zathrians had demonstrated their power, and humanity had learned its place. Trade Prince Vexner made a public statement expressing his hope that this unfortunate incident would lead to more productive relations between the Zathrian Consortium and Earth. Several alien news networks ran stories about how humans needed to accept their status as a junior species in galactic affairs, but they had misunderstood what the silence meant. Humans were not cowering in fear. They were preparing. The deception 72 hours after the Aurora Prime massacre, Captain Elena Vasquez returned to Station Meridian. She walked into the Galactic Trade Council chamber alone, carrying a datapad and wearing the same simple uniform as before. The assembled alien delegates watched her approach with a mixture of pity and satisfaction. The humans had been taught a harsh lesson, and now they would accept reality. Trade Prince Vexner occupied his usual position at the highest tier. He gestured magnanimously toward the speaking platform. Captain Vasquez, the Council recognizes you. We are prepared to discuss revised terms for Earth's participation in galactic commerce. Elena mounted the platform and activated her datapad. Her hands were steady, her expression neutral. The government of Earth has reviewed the proposal, presented by the Zathrian Consortium. After careful consideration and recent events, we have decided to accept all terms as outlined. Surprised murmurs rippled through the chamber. Several species had expected humanity to fight back, at least diplomatically. Instead, Earth was surrendering completely. Vexner's crystalline features brightened with satisfaction. A wise decision, Captain. The Zathrian Consortium is pleased that humanity has chosen pragmatism over pride. We will draft formal agreements immediately. Over the next 6 hours, Elena signed document after document. Earth agreed to pay the primitive species tax. Earth accepted Zathrian supervision of human trade routes. Earth acknowledged Zathrian authority to enforce regulations in human colonial space. Every humiliating clause that Vexner had proposed was accepted without argument. The smaller species in the council watched with a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that they were not the ones being humiliated. Sadness because they remembered when similar demands had been made of them. The powerful species watched with approval, pleased that the natural order was being maintained. What none of them knew was that Captain Elena Vasquez had been given very specific instructions before returning to Station Meridian. Her orders came from the highest levels of Earth's government and military command. She was to accept every demand, sign every document, and show absolutely no resistance. Because Earth needed time, just a little more time, for the pieces to move into position. As Elena signed the final agreement, Trade Prince Vexner descended from his elevated seat to stand beside her. He placed one crystalline hand on her shoulder in a gesture that was meant to appear benevolent, but came across as condescending. "Your species will benefit from Zathrian guidance," Vexner said. "In time, you will understand that this arrangement serves humanity's best interests. We are not cruel, Captain Vasquez. We simply maintain the natural order of things." Elena looked up at the alien prince. For just a moment, her carefully maintained neutral expression slipped, and something cold flickered in her eyes. "I hope you remember saying that, Trade Prince." "I really do." Vexner did not understand the comment, but something in her tone made him unconsciously step back. Then the moment passed, and Elena returned to her professional demeanor. She gathered her datapad and left the chamber without another word. The galaxy celebrated its victory over human arrogance. Trade agreements were finalized. Zathrian enforcement ships began regular patrols through human colonial space. Everything appeared to return to normal. But deep in Earth's solar system, hidden among the asteroids and ice fields where no alien sensors could detect them, 500 warships hung in perfect silence. They had been built in secret over 30 years, constructed in hidden shipyards, using technologies that humanity had reverse-engineered from a crashed alien probe decades ago. Every ship was coated with metamaterial that bent sensor beams around them, making them effectively invisible to galactic standard detection systems. Commander James Chun stood on the bridge of the lead vessel, a massive dreadnought that Earth had designated the Silent Thunder. He was 58 years old, a career military officer who had spent his entire adult life preparing for a war that most humans thought would never come. Now that war had arrived, and Chun felt a grim satisfaction that all those years of preparation had not been wasted. "Status of Ghost Fleet?" Chun asked his tactical officer. "All 500 vessels report ready, sir. Stealth systems operating at maximum efficiency. The Zathrians have no idea we exist." Chun nodded slowly. "Maintain silent running. Wait for the signal from Admiral Rodriguez. When Operation Silent Thunder begins, we will remind the galaxy what happens when you murder human children." Throughout human space, similar scenes were playing out. Hidden weapons platforms activated in remote asteroid fields. Special operations teams moved into position around Zathrian facilities. Sleeper agents who had been posing as ordinary human merchants for years received their final orders. Earth had spent 3 decades building a military force designed for exactly one purpose: to strike so hard and so fast that an enemy would not have time to react. The Zathrians believed they had intimidated humanity into submission. They were about to learn that human patience should never be mistaken for human weakness. The galaxy had provoked humanity. Soon, it would discover what came next. Asterisk the reckoning, the first strike. The attack began at exactly 0400 of Galactic Standard Time, synchronized across 53 star systems simultaneously. The Zathrian Empire never saw it coming. Commander James Chun stood on the bridge of the Silent Thunder, watching as his tactical display lit up with target acquisitions. The Ghost Fleet had been positioned for weeks, invisible ships hanging in the darkness around every major Zathrian military installation in known space. Now, as the countdown reached 0, 500 human warships revealed themselves for the first time. All vessels. Execute Operation Silent Thunder, Sean ordered calmly. The first targets were the Zathrian military command centers. On the fortress world of Zathrim, the primary defensive grid suddenly detected massive energy signatures materializing in orbit. Before the stunned Zathrian officers could even sound an alarm, the Silent Thunder unleashed its main batteries. Streams of coherent energy tore through shields that had been considered impenetrable, reducing the command fortress to molten slag in 17 seconds. Similar scenes played out across Zathrian space. At the naval yards of Krexva, where the Zathrian fleet's largest warships were constructed, human stealth cruisers appeared from nowhere and systematically destroyed every vessel under construction. The shipyard workers barely had time to evacuate before antimatter warheads vaporized facilities that had taken centuries to build. Asterisk. At the trade hub of Meridian 7, Zathrian enforcement vessels found themselves surrounded by human destroyers that had been hiding in the system's asteroid belt for 3 weeks. The Zathrian ships attempted to power their weapons, but human cyber warfare specialists had already infiltrated their systems. Every Zathrian vessel went dark simultaneously. Their crews trapped in disabled ships as human boarding parties took control without firing a shot. The most devastating strike came at Vexner's private estate on the pleasure world of Zathria. Trade Prince Vexner was hosting a celebration, confident that the human problem had been permanently resolved. 200 Zathrian aristocrats and military leaders had gathered to congratulate him on his diplomatic triumph over Earth. The Silent Thunder translated into orbit. Above the estate at 0403 GST, Commander Chun opened a direct communication channel to the surface, ensuring that Vexner and all his guests could hear his next words. Trade Prince Vexner, this is Commander James Chun of the Earth Defense Force. You murdered 234 human civilians, including 73 children. You believed this would teach humanity to fear you. Instead, you have taught us exactly how dangerous you are and why you must be stopped. Vexner's crystalline face appeared on Chun's display, his features twisted with shock and rage. This is an act of war. The Zathrian Empire will crush you for this insolence. Your empire is already crushed, Chun replied coldly. In the last 3 minutes, we have destroyed or captured every major military installation in Zathrian space. Your fleet is scattered, your command structure is decapitated, and your economic infrastructure is in ruins. You have no power left to threaten anyone. On the tactical display, Chun watched as human special operations teams executed their assignments across the estate. They moved with surgical precision, not to kill, but to capture. Every Zathrian leader at that celebration would stand trial for the Aurora Prime massacre. Vexner tried to flee, but human soldiers were already breaching his personal chambers. You cannot do this, Vexner transmitted, his voice breaking with disbelief. This violates every principle of galactic warfare. There were no declarations, no negotiations, no warnings. Chun's expression hardened. You destroyed a civilian transport without warning. You murdered children. Did you give them negotiations? Did you warn them before you vaporized that ship? He leaned toward his communication console. The difference between us, Trade Prince, is that we gave you more mercy than you gave them. Your people are alive and will face justice. Ours are dead. The communication cut off as Zathrian jamming systems finally came online, but it was far too late. Across their empire, Zathrian military forces found themselves fighting an enemy they could barely detect. Human ships appeared, struck with devastating precision, and vanished before return fire could be coordinated. Command posts that tried to organize resistance discovered their orders were being intercepted and countered before they could be implemented. The most shocking aspect of the human assault was not its ferocity but its restraint. Human forces specifically avoided civilian targets. Evacuation warnings were broadcast before every strike on populated installations. Medical supplies and rescue equipment were left behind at destroyed facilities. This was not a war of extermination. It was a calculated demonstration of overwhelming force combined with iron discipline. Within 6 hours, the Zathrian Empire's military capability had been reduced by 90%. Within 12 hours, their government was in complete chaos. Within 18 hours, their surrender was inevitable. The message station Meridian's Grand Chamber filled quickly as news of the human attack spread across the galaxy. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered in emergency session, their faces showing every shade of shock, fear, and confusion. The Zathrian delegation was notably absent, their seats empty for the first time in 3 centuries. Captain Elena Vasquez walked into the chamber exactly 24 hours after the first human strike. She moved with the same calm confidence as always, but now every alien eye followed her with newfound wariness. She was no longer the representative of a primitive species, begging for fair treatment. She was the ambassador of a power that had just demolished a galactic empire in less than a day. The chamber erupted in, shouted questions and accusations as Elena reached the speaking platform. The Krolin war chief roared demands for explanation. The Dravix delegation buzzed in panic. Smaller species huddled together, wondering if they would be targeted next. Elena waited patiently for the chaos to subside, her hands folded calmly behind her back. Finally, the council speaker, an ancient being named Thalrix from the neutral Veron species, called for order. His voice, amplified through the chamber systems, cut through the noise. Captain Vasquez, this council demands an explanation for Earth's unprovoked military assault on the Zathrian Empire. Unprovoked? Elena's voice was quiet, but it carried clearly through the suddenly silent chamber. The Zathrian consortium destroyed the Morning Star, killing 234 human civilians. They invaded our colonial space without justification. They murdered our children. And when we attempted to address this through proper diplomatic channels, we were threatened and coerced into accepting humiliating terms. That is what you call unprovoked? She activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. Images appeared showing the destruction of the Morning Star in horrific detail. The faces of the 73 children who had died were displayed one by one, along with their names, ages, and dreams for the future that would never be realized. 4-year-old Sophie Chun wanted to be a botanist, Elena said, her voice steady but cold. She had been growing flowers in the colony's garden. 16-year-old Marcus Williams was studying engineering, hoping to design better life support systems for deep space stations. 12-year-old Aisha Okonkwo played the violin and had just given her first public performance. The holographic display continued cycling through faces, and the chamber fell into an uncomfortable silence. Many of the assembled species had children of their own. The reality of what had happened was impossible to ignore when confronted with the personal. Details of young lives extinguished. Earth came to this council seeking fair trade status according to your own laws, Elena continued. We were mocked, threatened, and ultimately attacked. The Zathrians believed they could intimidate us into submission by murdering our children. They believed we were weak because we followed diplomatic protocols. They made a fatal miscalculation about what humanity truly is. She changed the holographic display. Now it showed real-time footage from Zathrian space. Disabled warships floating in orbit. Captured military installations with human flags flying above them. Zathrian officers surrendering to human soldiers. The sheer scale of Earth's military capability was suddenly visible to every species in the chamber. For 30 years, Earth has been building a defensive force, Elaine explained. We developed stealth technology that makes our ships invisible to galactic standard sensors. We created autonomous cyber warfare systems that can disable enemy vessels without destroying them. We trained special operations forces capable of operating in any environment. And we did all of this in complete secrecy, because we knew that one day, someone would mistake our peaceful nature for weakness. The Krolin war chief stood, his massive form bristling with barely controlled aggression. You deceived this council. You claimed to be a peaceful species while building an invasion fleet. We built a defensive fleet, Elena corrected sharply. Every weapon system we possess is designed for rapid response and minimal collateral damage. We did not invade Zathrian territory. We eliminated their ability to threaten us or anyone else. There is a difference. She pulled up another set of data showing the careful precision of human strikes. In 18 hours of military operations, Earth forces destroyed or disabled 3,000 enemy vessels and facilities. Total civilian casualties, 0. We broadcast evacuation warnings before every strike. We provided medical assistance to Zathrian personnel wounded in the fighting. We captured rather than killed enemy leadership so they could stand trial for their crimes. The chamber remained silent as the implications sank in. Humanity had demonstrated the capacity for overwhelming violence while simultaneously showing restraint that no other military power in known space had ever exhibited. It was a combination that made them far more dangerous than any simple warmonger. Asterisk. Elena's holographic display changed one final time, showing a comprehensive intelligence briefing on galactic military capabilities. The assembled species gasped as they saw detailed analyses of their own defensive systems, fleet positions, and strategic vulnerabilities. Earth had been watching and learning for 3 decades. We know exactly what every species in this chamber is capable of, Elena said quietly. We know your weaknesses and your strengths. We know which of you have contemplated attacking human colonies. Which of you have signed secret agreements to divide our resources? And which of you have been waiting for someone else to solve the human problem for you? The Dravix delegation shifted nervously. The Krolin war chief's aggressive posture softened slightly. Several smaller species looked at each other with growing concern. They had all underestimated humanity, and now they were realizing the full extent of that mistake. Earth is not interested in conquest, Elena continued. We do not want to dominate the galaxy or enforce our will on other species. But we will never again tolerate being threatened, coerced, or attacked. The Zathrian Empire learned this lesson at considerable cost. I hope the rest of you will learn it simply by watching what happened to them. The Galactic Response V Emergency Session continued for another 6 hours, as various species attempted to process what had happened. The Zathrian interim government, such as it was, transmitted an unconditional surrender within the first hour. They agreed to all of Earth's terms: reparations for Aurora Prime, trial of responsible parties for war crimes, permanent restrictions on their military capabilities, and complete withdrawal from human colonial space. But the real discussions were happening among the other species. The balance of galactic power had shifted dramatically in less than a day, and everyone was scrambling to figure out what it meant for their own interests. The Krolan war chief requested a private meeting with Captain Vasquez. He arrived with full ceremonial armor, a sign of respect among his warrior culture. "Humans fight with great skill and honor," he said bluntly. "The Krolan Empire wishes to establish formal alliance. We would prefer to have you as friends rather than enemies." Elena studied the massive warrior carefully. The Krolan had a reputation for directness and honoring their commitments. Earth is willing to discuss mutual defense agreements with species that treat us as equals. No more junior partner status. No more primitive species taxes. We stand on our own, or not at all. "Agreed," the war chief said immediately. "Krolan respect strength. You have proven yours." Similar conversations happened throughout Station Meridian. Species that had ignored or dismissed humanity suddenly wanted trade agreements and diplomatic recognition. Those who had supported Zathrian aggression quietly distanced themselves and hoped Earth would not remember their positions. The small species that had been exploited by Zathrian economic power looked to Earth as potential protectors. The most significant meeting came from an unexpected source. The Varan Council speaker, Thalrix, approached Elena privately in her quarters. The Varans were an ancient species known for their neutrality and wisdom. They rarely took sides in galactic disputes. "Captain Vasquez, the Varan Collective wishes to sponsor Earth's immediate elevation to prime species status," Thalrix said without preamble. "Your demonstration of military capacity combined with restraint has proven that humanity possesses the qualities necessary for galactic leadership." Elena was surprised. Prime species status was the highest rank in the Galactic Council, reserved for civilizations that had proven themselves over millennia. Earth had been space-capable for less than a century. "That is a generous offer, Speaker Thalrix. May I ask what prompted this decision?" The ancient being's expression was unreadable, but his voice carried a note of something that might have been respect. "In my 3,000 years, I have watched many species rise to power. Most do so through conquest and domination. They crush their enemies and glorify their victories. You humans did something far more impressive. You had the power to destroy the Zathrian Empire completely, to exact terrible revenge for the deaths of your children. Instead, you used precise force to neutralize a threat while preserving as many lives as possible. That is the mark of a truly advanced civilization." Elena felt the weight of those words. Earth had made its point, but now came the harder part, living up to the principles they claimed to represent. "We will accept prime species status on one condition. Earth will use its position to reform the trade and military regulations that allowed the Zathrians to exploit smaller species for centuries. No more primitive species taxes. No more economic coercion. If we are to be leaders, we will lead toward a more just galaxy." Thalrix nodded slowly. "That is precisely why we believe humanity deserves this status. Be warned, Captain. Many powerful species will resist such changes. You have made enemies today, along with allies." "We made enemies the moment we refused to be victims," Elena replied. "We might as well make sure it was worth it." The new order 3 weeks after Operation Silent Thunder, the Galactic Council convened for a historic session. Earth's delegation now occupied seats at the prime species tier, level with civilizations that had been traveling between stars when humanity still lived in caves. Trade Prince Vexner and 47 other Zathrian leaders stood in prisoner enclosures, awaiting trial for war crimes. Captain Elena Vasquez stood to address the assembly. Behind her, representatives from 23 smaller species had requested to speak in support of Earth's proposed reforms. The coalition represented billions of beings who had suffered under Zathrian economic exploitation for generations. The Galactic Trade Council was founded on principles of mutual benefit and peaceful cooperation, Elena began. Over time, those principles were corrupted. Powerful species used their advantages to dominate weaker ones. Economic strength became an excuse for coercion. Military capability became justification for threats. The system stopped serving justice and started serving power. She pulled up holographic displays showing the proposed reforms. Earth proposes a complete restructuring of trade regulations. All species will have equal access to common trade routes regardless of military or economic power. Enforcement actions must be approved by neutral arbitration boards before implementation. Any species that uses military force to coerce economic concessions will face immediate sanctions. These reforms will be enforced by a new coalition defense force composed of vessels from multiple species, preventing any single power from dominating through military strength. The chamber erupted in debate. Powerful species objected that these reforms would eliminate their competitive advantages. Smaller species cheered for protections they had never dreamed possible. The arguments raged for hours, but ultimately, the mathematics were simple. Earth now possessed the military capacity to enforce these reforms, whether other species agreed or not. The choice was between cooperation and confrontation. The reforms passed by a narrow margin. Earth immediately announced the formation of the Human Defense Perimeter, a network of defensive stations and patrol routes that would protect human colonies while also serving as safe havens for any species fleeing economic or military persecution. 23 species requested immediate admission to the perimeter. Within a month, that number would grow to 40-7. The trial of the Zathrian leadership became a defining moment for the new galactic order. Human prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of war crimes, economic exploitation, and systematic abuse of power. But they also insisted on fair judicial process, proper legal representation, and proportional sentencing. When Trade Prince Vexener was convicted, his sentence was exile and financial restitution, not execution. Humanity had proven it could be merciful, even toward those who had murdered human children. On the final day of the reform session, Elena gave one last address to the Galactic Council. She stood at the speaking platform, looking up at hundreds of alien faces that now showed respect instead of contempt. Many of you have asked me why Earth responded to the Aurora Prime massacre with such overwhelming force, she said quietly. You have questioned whether our reaction was proportional to the offense. Some have suggested that we used the tragedy as an excuse to reveal military capabilities we had been hiding. I want to address these questions directly and honestly. The chamber fell silent, every species listening carefully to understand the humans who had so dramatically altered galactic power dynamics. When the Zathrians destroyed the Morning Star, they killed 234 people, including 73 children, Elena continued. Those deaths were not numbers in a report. They were families destroyed. They were futures erased. They were dreams that will never be realized. Every single human in our 14 colonies felt those deaths personally, because we remember what it means to be vulnerable. She paused, letting her words settle. Humanity spent 100,000 years fighting for survival on a planet that was actively trying to kill us. We evolved in an environment where every day brought new threats and challenges. We learned to be creative, adaptable, and absolutely ruthless when protecting what we love. Those instincts do not disappear simply because we moved to space. When the Zathrians attacked Aurora Prime, they triggered something primal in human psychology. They reminded us that the galaxy is not safe, that our children are not protected, that we must be ready to defend ourselves against any threat. Our response was not about revenge or conquest. It was about ensuring that no one would ever again mistake human patience for human weakness, human diplomacy for human inability, or human mercy for human powerlessness. Elena looked directly at the cameras broadcasting this session across the galaxy. Billions of beings on thousands of worlds were watching, and she wanted every one of them to understand what humanity truly was. Earth is peaceful by choice, not necessity, she said with absolute clarity. We prefer negotiation to warfare, cooperation to conflict, and building to destroying. But make no mistake, our preference for peace comes from strength, not weakness. We have the capacity for extreme violence and the discipline to use it precisely. We can be your greatest allies or your worst enemies. The choice of which one we become is entirely up to you. The galaxy provoked humanity at Aurora Prime. We responded with such brutal efficiency that entire empires fell silent in fear. But we also showed restraint, mercy, and commitment to justice, even in our moment of greatest anger. That is what makes us dangerous. Not our weapons or our ships or our technology, but our ability to balance righteous fury with moral clarity. She stepped back from the platform. The Zathrian Empire learned this lesson at tremendous cost. I sincerely hope the rest of the galaxy will learn it simply by watching what happened to them. Because Earth has no interest in conquering the stars. But we will absolutely ensure that no one prevents us from living peacefully among them. The session ended with a standing ovation from the smaller species and respectful silence from the powerful ones. Earth had announced its arrival as a major galactic power in the most dramatic way possible, and the entire galaxy would spend years processing the implications. Commander James Chun watched the broadcast from the Bridge of Silent Thunder, now officially designated as the flagship of the Coalition Defense Force. Around him, his crew worked efficiently at their stations, maintaining watch over the new order they had helped create. Do you think they really understand? His tactical officer asked quietly. Do they know how close they came to seeing what humanity is really capable of? Chun thought about the Aurora Prime children who would never grow up. He thought about the restraint his forces had shown, even while conducting the most devastating military operation in recent galactic history. He thought about the thousands of Zathrian lives his people had deliberately spared when they could have chosen vengeance. They understand enough, Chun replied. They understand that we can be merciful, but we will never again be victims. That is all they need to know. The galaxy had been silent with shock for 3 weeks. Now it began to speak again, but the conversations were different. Humanity was no longer a curiosity or a minor player in galactic affairs. Earth was a power that commanded respect, inspired fear when necessary, but ultimately sought justice rather than domination. And every species in known space understood one simple truth. Never provoke humanity unless you are prepared to face consequences so swift and overwhelming that your empire falls before you can mount a defense. But also know that if you treat humans with respect and fairness, you will find no more loyal allies in the galaxy. The Aurora Prime children had not died in vain. Their loss had awakened something in humanity that would reshape galactic civilization for generations to come. Earth had built them a memorial not of stone or metal, but of a new order where no species would ever again use violence and coercion to exploit the weak. That was the memorial the children deserved. And humanity would defend it with every resource at their disposal, for as long as humans sailed among the stars. Asterisk.